that's us. I think we're ready to go now. Okay, so Mark Tierney, you're very welcome to this year's Harold's Cross Community Festival. Thanks for joining us. And you're well known to many of us in the village, but for those who don't know you, you have the enviable privilege of living in one of the village's finest houses, overlooking the main gates of Harold's Cross Park.
Yeah, very lucky.
And I understand you're not the first generation of your family to call this place, this beautiful house, home.
No, I'm the fourth generation of my family on my mother's side to live here. And it started with my great-grandparents, who started off in Harold's Cross around in Shamrock Villas, in what was known as Shamrock Lodge then. There's a building there now at the moment, I think it's a gym or something, on the left side as you go up Shamrock Villas, and they lived there first of all. He was a coal vendor, and around the beginning of the 1900s he moved around here, because if you see on the front of our house here there's a wall, kind of like we call it the bank, and he used that for his coal and, you know, loading up his horse and dray, I suppose it would have been then, you know. So that's where it started from. And they had, I think they had 5 children, one of them being my grandmother, Mary Jane Birmingham. And then my grandfather was from Ballyragget in Kilkenny, and he came up to work over in Mount Jerome Cemetery as a stonemason. He was from a stonemason family down in Ballyragget, and he came up to work. I got a job over here in Mount Jerome, and lodged in the house beside us here, 188. And obviously he's put an eye on Mary Jane, and they started to pass little notes over the wall to each other, and as they say, the rest is history. He married her in around the early 1900s, as far as I can gather from the dates, you know, and they went on to have 6 children, one who was my mother.
Okay, so they had 4 sons and 2 daughters, I understand?
They had 4 sons and 2 daughters,
okay,
yeah. And the 4 sons followed their father into the stonemasonry business.
Yeah.
Worked in different...
Where did they work?
They worked in, 2 of them worked, one of them worked in a place called Harrison's of Pearse Street, which would have been a well-known, you know, stoneworks and ecclesiastical, you know, the stonemasons. They would have worked in churches all around Ireland, churches around Dublin. At the time they would have been building, you know, new churches around the city here, and they would have done a lot of the marble work. Another one of them worked in a place called Pearse. That firm were some way connected to Porrick Pearse. I think it was his father or something. That was a firm called Pearse's. So 2 of them worked there. Another one of them worked in Early's of Camden Street. They did an awful lot of stained glass and marble work in churches as well. He would have done a lot of that work for them, you know.
Did one of them work up at
Mount Argus?
The
eldest of
road,
them worked for a firm in Pearse Street, and they did a lot of some work up in Mount Argus. And one of them actually, the Martin, who worked in Early's of Camden Street, they were responsible for removing Father Charles. He was Father Charles then, he's St. Charles of Mount Argus. His remains were buried in the little cemetery beside the church in Mount Argus, the monastery there, the little cemetery where all the Passionists are buried. And I
think it's the only known burial place of a saint in Ireland.
Probably, yeah, maybe so, yeah. He was responsible, and they removed Father Charles' remains from the little cemetery into the church in sometime in the late 1940s, I think. He was one of the people involved in that.
So that was your uncle? My uncle was involved in the reinterment of St. Charles?
So, yeah.
Yeah. And what was his name?
Martin Coffey.
He was Martin?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically then, he also was involved when they exhumed St. Charles, as he is now, in the 1980s, when he was going to be beatified.
Yeah.
And he was one of the only people left who remembered him being interred in the 1940s.
Yeah.
So he was brought up there to as one of the people to say that the casket came up as it went down with the Vatican seals on it and all that.
Okay.
So pretty, historical event really in the area, and he would have died a couple of years after that actually. Yeah. He didn't live to see him being canonised actually.
Okay.
He didn't live to see Father Charles being canonised. He was beatified, all right.
And then there was Martin.
There was Martin Coffey Senior,
Yeah.
who was my grandfather,
Uh-huh.
and then there was his son Martin Junior,
Right. Okay.
who was the one involved in
Uh-huh.
the Mount Argus work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So take us back to Martin Coffey Senior, because he's an interesting story as well.
He's the one that came up from, as I said, Kilkenny.
Yeah.
And married my grandmother and moved in here, and then he went to the First World War obviously was it 1915 that started, 1915, and I think they'd got about they had 4 children I think at that stage, so he went off to the 14-18 war, wasn't it, the First World War, I think. So he went in that the Somme. He was in the Battle of the Somme. And I think he went as a lot of other people did at the time, because there was no work here for them, and he went there and was missing in action out there for some days, and he was found after 3 days buried up to his neck in shrapnel, and I think he might have been, the story goes, I think he was sent back then. And went back to work at his job as a stonemason in Mount Drum, but was never really the same after it. He
didn't recover.
He went on to work and everything, but he was psychologically scarred from it. He was badly damaged, I think, after it.
Yeah. And that manifested itself in what, night terrors.
Night terrors. That my parents used to hear. They'd hear him screaming, and they'd go in. He'd be under the bed, hiding. You can imagine the awfulness of what they must have gone through, but he lived until his late 70s, and continued working as a stonemason until to his very late 60s or early 70s, and he ended up blind from all the work as a stonemason. They wouldn't have had protective gear in those days,
Yeah.
But he ended as a child. I remember him. He was blind.
Was he stationed for a while over at Cahalbrua Barracks as well?
Yes. When they used to come home, apparently, they got leave at some stage. He would be stationed at Cahalbrua Barracks, and his eldest son had joined the Fenian Boys or something, the old IRA, and he was a runner for the old IRA, and he used to have to hide apparently all his stuff when his father was coming home, because there was
this was James Coffey.
This was right? James Coffey, yeah. Okay. So he would have been Martin Coffey's eldest son.
Yeah. And he got into a few scrapes during the 1916.
Well, the family folklore goes that he was held over Templeoe Bridge by his ankles by the British to get whatever he was he running with letters or something or whatever, or notes for the IRA or whatever, and he didn't ever speak very much about it, as a lot of them didn't, I don't think, afterwards. I remember him well as a child, but he'd never talk very much about it. And I remember when he died in the early 70s, he had the flag on his coffin, and he was buried in Mount Drum, and they had the salute over the grave and that,
So we have the Birminghams, we have the Coffeys, and then we have the Tierneys.
Tierney, yeah.
So that tells me which maybe was a bit unusual insofar that the house was passed down.
It came down to the women, yeah.
The woman.
Yeah.
Right.
And well, my parents, I think when they got married, moved out, and I think my grandparents got sick then, and then they ended up coming back here and living here, and so I'm still here.
So tell me about your father. Your father was John Tierney.
My father was John Tierney, and he came from a place called Fox and Geese, Red Cow, out that direction. They were farmers. As in those days, there would have been a lot of farmland out there before all the industrial estates, before the land was bought up. And
Would that have been what, tillage or livestock?
yeah, tillage and livestock, a mixed farm, and that was there up till the early 90s. That was sold off then,
And a woman brought him to Harold's Cross.
A woman brought him to Harold's Cross. Another coffee.
And was that courtship over the back wall, or was it?
No, that was courtship through my father's sister, who had her own business in Capel Street. She was a dressmaker, a seamstress kind of, and my mother used to go to her for, my grandmother and her used to go to have their clothes made, as women did in those days, and she said, "Oh, you'll have to come out and visit where I'm from." And she not only visited, but she got a husband as well out of it. So he moved in here then.
Did he continue to farm? Or?
He farmed and part-time kind of. He was really a farmer at heart. But when he got married and had started having a family, he needed to work as well. So he went to work for Killeen Paper Mills, which was out that direction where he came from, So he kind of part-time farmed,
And your mother worked for time as well before
she got
married?
Yeah, she worked in the civil service. She was in industry and commerce, I think she worked in. But like women in those days, they had to, the marriage bar was there, they had to give up work when they got married.
Yeah.
When they probably most needed a few bob,
Exactly. Yeah. So there was 4 of you, is that right?
Yeah, there was the 4 in my family.
Right.
My eldest sister, there was 1 girl and 3 boys.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so I remained on then in the house here. And my husband lives here now with me. John Meehan.
John's from the
John's
other
from,
side
John's
of town.
from the other side of town. He's from
Right.
across the water, from Glasnevin.
He's from Glasnevin.
Yeah.
And
We won't hold that against him.
when did you meet?
We met in 2006, and we were civilly partnered in 2012. I better get this right. 2012, yeah.
Okay.
So John had moved in a couple of years before that, so he's now in 190 as well.
And you've done a wonderful job with it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we've done a bit of work over the years, as in the last probably 10 years we've done a lot of work actually,
And can you tell me a bit about the house itself, Mark?
The house dates back to about, unfortunately the original deeds were lost, but as far as we can gather, it dates back to about 1833, I think. And my mother used to tell us that before her family moved in here, there was a priest lived here, and I think he was connected to temperance. He was that's what's the way the story goes, But we've checked the 1901 census and the 1911, I think, when they came online, and you could see there was quite a few people of the families. Like according as the families got married, they'd come and live here till they got their own place, So you could have 12 or 13 or 14 people living, here.
And the view from these houses, the enviable view over the park, would have been quite different when the house was built in 1835.
Yeah,
was it still a commonage then, or?
No, I think the park over there was it the late 1800s that was open, but it was a commonage, like it was for grazing your sheep, before it became a park, and I can't remember the date the park actually opened, but I think it was in the late 1800s, as far as I can gather. But it would have been a fairly new park when they moved in, in here. Would have been very young,
And a house this old, it's bound to have thrown up a few secrets or stories down through the years.
Well, yeah, there's a few. We found the original key for the whole door actually when we were doing a bit of work onto the upstairs. We found the original key, which is huge, and the keyhole is still there, but it's blocked up. But we actually found the key and it fits it.
Wow.
you know, and we found a really old time Psalms, you know, table book with my granduncle's initials on it, you know, and just a few bits and pieces. Unfortunately, no sovereigns under the floorboards or anything.
What would the table book have been used for?
I gather it was like a school book, you know, like a you know, a children's kind of table book for Psalms, you know. I think. Yeah.
Like a Times table book?
Times table book, yeah.
Very good, very good. So, so you've been here since you were born?
All my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will we be rude and ask you what age you are now, Mark?
Oh, well, be sure it doesn't matter, I'll tell you anyway. I was born in 1959, so I'm 61 at the moment. 62 this year.
So you grew up in the village in the
Yeah.
60s and 70s? Okay. So
And it was in ways a very different, it's kind of coming back into a bit the way it was then again now with the new shops opening up. But when I was a kid growing up, and up to, you know, I suppose the last 15 years or so, we would have had, all the shops would have been occupied around the corner. You know, like most villages, you had all your own, your bakers, your pork butchers, your beef butchers, your drapery shop, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then where Centra was the big grocery shop, which was Cooney's when we were growing up, you know, and everybody did their shopping in Cooney's, you know.
You weren't going to Tesco or Dunn's in those days?
No, there wasn't any. In I think the first one opened up about probably when I was about 10 maybe. There was one opened up in Georgia Street at Dunn's, I think, and then there was the Tesco open, which was Quinsworth
back
in
down,
Farnham,
wasn't it?
yeah, and maybe a H Williams in Rathmines or something. But people really stuck to their local shops then, you know. They supported them, you know.
Can you remember any of the names of the other shops?
Oh yeah,
about?
well, there was Anne's newsagent just around the corner here. There was the famous Paddy Walsh bicycle shop on the corner here where the new building is built.
Mm-hmm.
Paddy was like the Lord Mayor of Harold's Cross, you know. Everybody of my generation will remember him, you know. We all got our bikes, our first bikes
Latter
from
day
him.
Tony McDermott?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's exactly what you're talking about. Paddy was a great character, yeah, and
You would have got your
we all got our
first
bikes.
bike there.
And then our next bikes, and then maybe a motorbike because he did motorbikes as well. I got a Honda 50 from him, I remember that. And then as I said, we had the news agents around the corner from that. Then there was like greengrocers there as well, and we had the Mrs. Lawler's drapery shop. That was a well-known shop in the area too. We would have grown up with those boys. We would have palled with them, you know.
You didn't really have to go anywhere?
No, you didn't. You did everything in the one area really. We even had our own cinema. The Kenilworth was just up the road. So if you were lucky enough to have the few bob on a Saturday afternoon, the sixpence.
So that was also known as the Classic, is that right?
Well, before that it was known as the Kenilworth, and then
Okay.
it became the Classic.
Uh-huh.
See, the Classic, there was a Classic cinema in Tierney,
Mm-hmm.
which was owned by the same people as owned the Kenilworth, and then they just combined the two, and the Classic in Tierney closed, and they renamed the Kenilworth in Harold's Cross as the Classic, and put two cinemas in, two screens into it. Was very posh
Yeah.
in those days to have two screens.
Can you
And a little
can you
local.
describe it?
Well, it was just, we went from one screen and to have this, you know, two screen cinema, which was two different queues and everything. It was a big deal. I don't know when that actually happened. Probably it was probably the 80s when that happened, I'd say.
Yeah. So how
Or maybe
often?
the 70s.
How often did you go to the Classic?
Everyone around went every Saturday afternoon. You'd go up, you know, and queue up. There was always a huge big queue to get in. Sometimes if it was a really popular movie was just starting, you mightn't get in. You know, if the queue went too, you didn't get up there in time, you know.
So you have to wait till the matinee the following Saturday then?
Absolutely. Yeah, because it went on for months in those days. There wasn't loads of films, like, you know. Gonna begin to sound very old here.
Can you recall how much for a show back in those days?
I think it was about sixpence or something in old money, really old money.
And it's well remembered as well around the city for the Rocky Horror
It
Picture
was,
Show on
and
Friday
there was
night.
the man that owned it was called Albert Kelly, and he actually lived in Kenilworth Square, and he was one of the people in, Ireland, I suppose, to pioneer that the local cinemas got the films, the up-to-date movies, because years ago only the big cinemas in town got the most up-to-date movies, the new releases kind of. So he pioneered with a lot of the other small cinemas around Dublin anyway, I'm sure maybe Ireland, I don't know, that they would all get them together, So suddenly we were getting all the good stuff, He was a great man actually. He was well known, very well known in the area. Lovely gentleman.
And I think you were saying before that Harold's Cross back then, 60s, 70s, maybe more so 70s, was quite flatlandish. I think it was right.
Yeah, it went from when I was a kid, kind of. We went to know, like, you'd know everybody around. All the families, we'd all know each other. We all played together and everything. But then it started to go into, a lot of houses went into flats as older families moved on or died off or whatever, and the children moved off into sorry about the clock.
Okay.
Moved off, and then houses would be bought and broken up into flats. Like for instance, the house beside us here was in 3 flats at one stage, until it was bought back over. Then maybe probably in the 80s, maybe sometime late 80s, and the couple that bought it converted it back into a private house, and it has since, luckily enough, thank God, been a private family living in there, different, it was sold again, and there's family with children in there now, which is lovely for the area, and it's starting to become quite family orientated again, I find, the area. And of course since the village council started, we've got a great community spirit back again in the area, That's helped an awful lot.
And how can you give us a sense of what it was like when you were growing up in the 60s and 70s? What was it like just generally in terms of? It
was kind of very safe feeling about I remember as a kid growing up that you felt very safe because you kind of knew everybody, and you just felt safe in the area, like, and you're in the summertime when you're on your holidays, you were washed, you got dressed, and you put on your shorts and your sandals, and you went out in the morning to the park where everybody else was, and you played there for the day until you were full, you got your lunch or whatever, you went back out again and did the same thing, and that was the place to go, like, was the park.
Afraid to go back home in case you get kept in?
Well, that's it. And in the summertime they used to have they would have maybe a concert in the park in the evening time.
What sort of concert?
Like it could be like a band, maybe like a pipe band or something, or Irish dancing or things like that, and you had to make sure you were allowed up to stay, because that would have been late, like in the summer evenings you would have been allowed to stay up and stay over in the park till about 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the evening, which was a big thing,
And what other sort of adventures did you get up to around?
Oh, well, no, I couldn't be telling you all that now, Brian.
Go on. You're among friends.
We did it. We used to. Another place for us to play would have been. There was a place up Mountain View Avenue, and it was called. There's actually a block of apartments built on it now. I think it's called Mountain View Court or something, and that would have been kind of wilderness, like. What,
so that's just up behind where the coffee shop is and the bathroom shop.
Yeah, there's a coffee shop on the corner and a bathroom shop. But up Mountain View Avenue, and you turn left when you go up, up a bit, and on your right there's a block of apartments, as I say there now, but they would have probably been built in the 70s. But there was a kind of a piece of land where we used to all go. It was called the Long Gardens, and a lot of us we used to build, our little huts up there, and you played up there as well, like, it was great.
Was it even then? Was it a sense that it was a kind of a place apart? And there was there's a book by Nathaniel Burton, I think, that was written in the 1850s, and he describes the village back then as like I think he says a place apart from the beau monde of Rathmines, the new world of Rathmines. But,
Yeah, I think it was a bit. It was more villagey, I think, up here, kind of. You know.
Still right up to the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very villagey.
Yeah.
And if anyone died around, all the shops would pull their shutters down or their blinds down, and the funeral was going by. It was very. Everybody knew everybody. You know, it was a close little village.
Yeah.
You know, too close sometimes that when you were a kid,
Well, if
if
you're
you
up to
did
any
something
badness,
wrong,
yeah.
your parents weren't too. They probably heard about it before you even got home.
Yeah.
You know, so it was.
And are there any of your friends from back then that are still in the village or nearby?
There's still a few of the lads now. John Nolan, who works in Santry, still knocking about, and Kieran Malarkey would have been another. Whereas Kieran is years older than me now, you know. But I know there's a few. Paddy McGovern, yeah, yeah. There's a few. Still a few of the lads knocking about, you know. There's a few of the old neighbours still around. There's Shabelle, of course, who's in her mid-90s now. She'd be probably one of the oldest residents from my time, you know. But yeah, no, it's still, and as I say, there's definitely going back to more of a sense of community. I find in the last however long, like 10 years at how long has the village council gone now? Probably maybe about 10 years, is it? And it's really done a lot of good, you know.
Yeah. And can you remember any characters from the village back then? Just that you're saying there was a real sense of village about it. You know, so
Yeah,
every village has characters.
well, there was a guy in when I was a child over at Mount Jerome, when funerals would come, you couldn't park. Cars weren't allowed in really in those days. All the cars parked outside, and there was an old guy. Adler was his name. We that's all I know him by. But he used to wear a big long coat and the cap, and he collected money from anyone who was parking around in the area. And my abiding memory is all the money, and you'd hear the rattle of the money in his coat. And as a kid, of course, you thought, oh my God, he's, you know, big long pockets full of money, you know. He was one of the characters around. And who else can I think of now? There was a famous plumber called Jim Smith, who his office was it was Graham Bar, and when I was a kid, Flanagan's, which is now Peggy Kelly, but it's still owned by the same family. Sean Flanagan, who owns the pub, actually would have been another one of our contemporaries around. You know, he would have been my brother's age, and they would have been all knocked around together, kind of thing, you know. But Jim Smith, the plumber, lived in Leinster Place, but his office was in Flanagan's Bar. If you wanted Jim, you went into Flanagan's Bar to get him, you know. He was fond of his pint. And I'm trying to think, is there anybody else now? There's probably loads of them, and I'll think of them afterwards. Who else was there?
You have lots of happy memories down through the years. You're, what,
Yeah.
62 years here
Yeah,
now?
great memories.
Yeah.
Great memories from the house here, and you know, always great neighbours around.
Yeah.
You know.
And you never thought of moving away at any stage, or?
No, not really, and I don't think I will now. Like even along on our little terrace here at the end house, Barry Roach lives there with his wife and two daughters. Well, that would have been his grandparents' home as well.
It's Barry and Jackie.
Barry and Jackie, yeah, and so his grandfather and grandmother, I remember all them, and his aunts and uncles when they were, you know, when we were kids, you know. His uncle Liam was famous. He was a great footballer actually. I think he played for Dublin at one stage, and he was called the Harrier. Roach was his name. That was his nickname. But we used to play football around in the Shamrock Villas. But if a ball went over, and if Liam got the ball, you didn't get it back that day, you might have got it back because they were fed up with balls going over, but you got it back and it might have been flat when you got it back, you know.
So you have no plans to move on at this stage?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
I don't think I will.
Okay, Mark Tierney, thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to chat.